The airport at midnight looked less like a place of travel and more like a vast humming container for human fatigue. Fluorescent lights vibrated in long, unbroken rows above the concourse, each one a thin white blade cutting through the stale air. Their reflections stretched across the polished floor like quiet warnings. People moved through the space with the slow, imprecise steps of the exhausted, dragging luggage wheels that clicked in irregular rhythms. A fractured orchestra with no conductor, Maya Lawson stepped into this light with the measured gait of someone accustomed to rooms that judged her before she spoke. The leather case in her right hand swung slightly with each step, its worn handle pressing a familiar line into her palm. Inside was everything that named her appointment papers. Her oath certificate, the sealed briefing packet from the governor. Nothing in her posture revealed that she had just become the new state's attorney. The secrecy of the swearing-in still clung to her clothes like static. She kept her shoulders relaxed, chin level, eyes steady, calm without apology. But calm, when worn by certain people in certain spaces, could be mistaken for something else. A police officer stationed near the security exit glanced up when she passed. He was broad in the shoulders, young enough to still believe the badge completed him, old enough to have learned that command could be mistaken for competence. His face tightened with a quick, unexamined suspicion. He watched her walk. Maya felt his gaze like a shift in barometric pressure. She didn't turn toward him. She simply continued, following the signs toward ground transportation, the leather case brushing lightly against her leg. The overhead announcements echoed above her boarding calls. Gate changes. Reminders of unattended luggage, each one stretched thin by the acoustics of the terminal. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from the governor's deputy chief of staff made it out. Call tomorrow morning. Congratulations again. She didn't open it. She kept walking. The officer began moving toward her, his heavy boots landing with the deliberate finality of someone preparing to assert authority. Maya registered the pace behind her and slowed. Not out of fear, the emotion she felt was older than that. Quieter, something like resignation mixed with a cold. Precise anger that never rushed to the surface. He closed the distance. "Ma'am," he called, a single word shaped like a command rather than an address. She stopped. The leather case settled at her side. "Yes." Her voice was even unhurried. The officer angled himself in front of her, blocking her path. Behind him, security cameras nested in their domes, small glass eyes, watching without interpretation. "Need to see your ID?" he said. She blinked once, slow. "For what purpose?" His jaw shifted. "You looked uncertain about where you were headed. You just need to verify you're supposed to be here. I passed through the exit like everyone else." Her tone remained level. "Is there a specific issue you need to address?" The officer straightened, mistaking steady speech for challenge. "Just show me your ID." She reached into her coat pocket with deliberate clarity, moving slowly enough to strip the moment of any claim of threat. She withdrew her wallet and handed over her license. He studied it too long, eyes narrowing as if the photo were a puzzle meant to expose a lie. He glanced at her face, then back at the card, then again at her face, as though searching for a flaw that would justify his scrutiny. "What brings you here tonight?" he asked. Returning home, she said, "From where?" "A work matter." He waited, expecting elaboration. She offered none. The silence expanded between them, checking the edges of both their frames. He interpreted it as resistance. She let the interpretation sit. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. There is no basis for that." She didn't raise her voice. The words landed like a slow, heavy stone. "I've complied. You're acting suspicious. By being quiet?" His breath hitched, a tiny, involuntary tick. The fluorescent lights above them hummed louder. "Come with me," he repeated, and this time his hand drifted toward the cuffs on his belt. A gesture rehearsed through training sessions. The muscle memory of institutional instinct. Maya exhaled once through her nose. The officer saw what he wanted, defiance. What it truly was, exhaustion sharpened into clarity. "I am not resisting," she said. but I will not consent to detention without cause." He didn't respond. He took her arm. The handcuffs were cold before they were tight. The metal closed around her wrists with a mechanical certainty, a small, precise violence. She felt the familiar sting as skin pressed against steel. But her expression didn't shift. Travelers slowed as they passed, eyes flicking toward the scene before quickly turning away. Complicity disguised as minding one's own business. The airport swallowed their silence, adding it to the thousands of silences. Held inside its walls, the officer guided her toward a side corridor off the main concourse. The security cameras along the ceiling adjusted angles as she moved beneath them, tracking the curving line of her escorted walk. They captured everything without understanding any of it. Maya's leather case swung lightly with each step, still in the officer's free hand after he took it from her. The case looked smaller now, diminished in his grip, its significance invisible to every person who passed. She kept her posture upright, refusing to shrink into the role he had assigned her. As they approached the nondescript gray door leading to the screening rooms, the fluorescent light flickered, a rapid tremor, then steadiness again. She watched the flicker's reflection ripple across the floor. Disrupting the clean lines for one brief second, the officer reached for the door. The hinges groaned softly behind them. The terminal continued its indifferent rhythm, rolling suitcases, muffled conversations, tannoy chimes, a world in motion that did not pause for the truth of what was unfolding. Maya stepped through the doorway, her wrists bound, her title unknown to the man who held her arm. The door closed with a heavy, airtight thud. The system had begun its work. The room swallowed sound the moment she entered it. The door sealed shut behind her with the soft compression of industrial padding, muting the distant airport noise into a dull, unreachable pulse. Maya sat where they directed her on, a metal chair bolted to the floor, wrists still bound in the cold precision of the cuffs. The chair across from her sat empty, angled slightly off-center, as if someone had left in haste and never returned to correct it. Its vacancy held weight, a quiet suggestion of how many people had sat where she sat now, waiting to be interpreted by someone in uniform. Above her, a single overhead lamp cast a sterile circle of light onto the table between the chairs. Its glow was too bright for a room of this size, flattening her features and drawing a sharp gray shadow beneath her chin. The edges of the room dissolved into softer darkness, turning the walls into suggestions rather than boundaries. The vents hummed with the low vibration of machinery that never slept. Maya inhaled once, slow. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant, sharp, clinical, meant to suggest cleanliness rather than ensure it. She shifted her wrists slightly, not in discomfort, but to confirm the cuff's position. Feeling the metal's steady hold, the officer who brought her in stood near the door, posture straightened into rigid certainty. His hands rested too deliberately on his belt, as though reminding himself of his authority. His breath came in shallow, measured draws. He had not asked her name again. He had not asked her anything since they entered. Perhaps he believed silence strengthened his position. He didn't understand what silence could be. Maya kept her gaze forward, resting lightly on the empty chair. The absence of her leather case on the table brought a quiet, unsettling clarity. Her badge, her title, her authority sat sealed in a bag somewhere beyond the locked door. An unwitnessed truth, a muted safeguard. It did not bother her. It confirmed something she already knew. Identity meant nothing unless the one in power recognized it. The officer finally moved. A shift of weight, a step forward. The soles of his boots pressed against the tile with a small, authoritative click. He took the seat opposite her, but did not scoot it closer. The distance between them remained wide, a calculated gap filled with fluorescent brightness and unspoken accusation. He folded his hands on the table. It's Capadon, he began. Voice carefully level. Most people tell me who they are by now. Maya did not respond. He waited. The room waited with him. Silence thickened, collecting like dust in the corners. You got something to hide? He asked, his words settled heavily, as though expecting the weight of confession. Maya watched him, not in defiance, not in fear, simply in observation. She noted the faint redness at the edges of his eyes, the slight crease in his left sleeve, the way he tapped one index finger against the table every few seconds. A nervous tic disguised as authority. Her own stillness grew more pronounced in contrast. She became the room's quiet center. The officer exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm trying to make this simple. You cooperate. This doesn't take long." The vents hummed. The lamp buzzed faintly, a small electrical tremor. Maya lowered her eyelids halfway, the gesture subtle but controlled. It was not submission. It was refusal to feed the performance he expected. He leaned forward. "You're not helping yourself." Still, she didn't speak. The silence stretched longer this time, more deliberate, occupying the space where pressure often ballooned into confession. She felt her pulse, calm and steady, beating against the metal at her wrists. He sat back abruptly, frustration pushing his shoulders higher. "Fine. We can play it this way." He reached for a form on a clipboard resting beside him. Thick paper, institutional font, empty lines waiting to be filled with her information. Her compliance, her assumed guilt. He wrote some things low, angry strokes of the pen that pressed too deeply. Leaving grooves on the sheet beneath, she watched the movement of his hand, the tightness in his grip. Her silence unsettled him more than any protest would have. After several minutes, he set the pen down with an intentional clatter. "You want to tell me where you were coming from?" No answer. "You want to give me your employer's name?" No answer. "You want to tell me anything at all?" Maya lifted her eyes fully, meeting his stare with a composure that shifted the atmosphere. The lamp haloed her face, drawing out the sharp planes of her cheekbones, steady line of her jaw. She didn't blink. This silence was not passive. This silence was protest shaped into stillness. He looked away first. The vent's hum grew louder for a moment. As though affirming the shift, he stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with a screech that scraped the floor's polished surface. "I'll be right back," he muttered, though the words were more for himself than for her. His boots echoed across the small room. He opened the sealed door. He stepped out. The door closed behind him with a soft mechanical sigh, and the room exhaled into a deeper quiet. Maya allowed her body to settle, not slouched, not rigid, but upright, aligned, contained. Her wrists shifted again in the cuffs, the small movement almost imperceptible. The metal held firm, cold against her skin. Across the room, the empty chair stared back at her with its skewed angle and hollow presence. It felt like a witness, a reminder that countless others had waited here. Judged by glances, by posture, by silence, her leather case, her badge, her authority, her name, remained outside this room. Sealed behind a desk, stripped of its voice, she breathed evenly. The vents hummed. The lamp buzzed. The silence widened. She understood the ritual of spaces like this. She understood how easily people became categories in rooms with bolted chairs and bright lights. And she knew exactly how long she could wait. Minutes passed in measured increments, marked only by the faint tick of something mechanical behind the wall. The room's air felt heavier, a slow, pressing weight, far down the corridor. Footsteps approached multiple sets, steadier, more purposeful than the officers earlier. Pace. Maya didn't move. The handle turned, the door unsealed with a soft hiss. The ritual would continue, but so would her silence. The system had not yet realized who it had confined, and she had no intention of revealing it first. The door opened with a controlled slowness, the kind used by people who believe their presence alone orders a room into obedience. An older man stepped in, a supervisor by the cut of his uniform, the weight of his keyring, the way exhaustion clung to him like a second badge. His face was weathered not by age alone, but by years of enforcing the mundane rituals of an institution that never questioned its own correctness. He carried a clipboard under one arm and authority in the set of his jaw. He did not look at Maya immediately. He looked at the officer hovering behind him, irritation already forming in the tight lines around his mouth. "You said we had a non-compliant traveler?" he said, his voice low, practiced, bored. "Yes, sir," the officer replied, trying to masked the nervous edge that had grown since the last chapter of Silence. The supervisor finally turned toward Maya. His gaze swept over her with the efficiency of someone assessing a form for errors, looking not at her eyes, but at her posture, her handcuffed wrists, the stillness she held like a blade of tempered steel. "Name," he said. His tone presumed falsity. His tone presumed everything. Maya met his gaze with steady calm. "I haven't refused to identify myself." "Then let's get this done." He pulled the clipboard forward. "State your full legal name." She said nothing. He tapped the pen against the board, a small, agitated rhythm. "I don't have time for games tonight." Maya held his eyes, unblinking. Her silence became a mirror, reflecting his impatience back at him. The vent hummed overhead. The lamp buzzed faintly. A clock on the wall, a cheap, oversized plastic disc, too loudly for a room this small. The supervisor exhaled. "Fine." He flipped the form to the top page. His handwriting was cramped, rigid, shaped by years of filling out incident reports in narrow boxes. "Subject refuses to provide identity," he muttered as he wrote. "Possible false documentation, possible withheld information, possible risk." Every pen stroke felt like an indictment crafted in real time. He asked, without looking up, "Where were you traveling from this evening?" No response. "Where do you work?" Silence. "What's in the case we confiscated? Something you want to explain before we open it?" Her eyes remained calm, unflinching. He set the pen down harder than necessary. The clipboard clicked against the metal table. The clock ticked on, marking each second of tension pulling tighter. The officer shifted behind him. "She's been like this since the concourse, sir." "Of course she has," the supervisor muttered. "People don't stay quiet unless they have something to hide." Maya inhaled one slow, controlled. Not at his accusation, but at the predictable choreography of the moment, the assumption that silence equals guilt. The institutional certainty that identity is something granted, it's not carried. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. "Look, nobody ends up in this room by accident. You want to help yourself? Start talking." She didn't. He waited. Clock ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a suitcase thudded to the ground, followed by a muffled voice. "This small, airless chamber, with its too bright lamp and bolted chairs, I can hold you for up to 24 hours without charges," the supervisor said. His voice didn't rise. Authority rarely needed to. "If you think this silence act is going to change anything, it won't." Still nothing. He sat back and scratched his cheek, a gesture betraying his growing uncertainty. "You traveling alone?" Silence. "You have any outstanding warrants?" Her eyebrows didn't even twitch. "You under investigation for something we should know about?" Nothing. The supervisor closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed irritation. "All right, starting detainment paperwork." He clicked his pen again. The form pages rustled. He marked boxes. Refusal to identify. Suspicious behavior. Tick. Tick. Possible threat. Tick. Maya watched every stroke. The clock punctuated each one. The officer hovered near the corner like a reprimanded child, eyes flicking between them. Outside the room, footsteps approached. The supervisor didn't notice. Another officer opened the door halfway. "Sir, administration needs to confirm something with you." The supervisor didn't look up. "Tell them to wait. I'm completing processing. They said it's urgent." "Everything is urgent to them." "No, sir," the younger officer insisted. "They're asking about a travel manifest. Something's not matching up." The supervisor's head lifted, annoyed. "Fine." He rose slowly, the stiffness of long shifts settling in his joints. "Stay with her," he ordered the first officer. The door opened wider. A brief wash of cooler hallway air entered the room, breaking the thick, stale temperature. Maya watched the shift as if observing a change in weather. The supervisor stepped out. The door closed. The ticking of the clock filled the absence he left behind. The officer in the corner shifted uncomfortably, hands clasped behind his back. He avoided Maya's gaze now, as though the silence between them had changed shape. Minutes passed. The ticking grew louder, not actually, but perceptually. Taking on the rhythm of something approaching revelation, through the walls came fragments of muffled conversation. Name flagged. Governor's office? Must be an error. Who signed? The officer swallowed hard. Then footsteps returned, more hurried, more unstable. The supervisor reappeared, face paler.
Ow.
Clipboard still in hand, but now useless. He stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at Maya as though she had transformed without moving. A man reassessing, not a suspect, but a situation rapidly slipping out of his control. The silence she held earlier now felt like an indictment pointed at him. He stepped inside slowly, papers trembling slightly in his grasp. "Ma'am," he said, voice thin, we need to confirm something." He set the clipboard down with care, as though it had become fragile. "What is your full name?" Maya did not answer. Not yet. The officer behind him looked at the floor, outside in the hallway. A phone rang sharp, urgent, insistent. The first domino had been tipped. The system had begun to sense the error in its own machinery. And the wire of tension stretched tighter still, ready to snap. The hallway outside the inquiry room had taken on a new kind of silence, one marked not by indifference, but by unease. It was the silence of people suddenly unsure of the ground beneath them, the soft echo of phones ringing, printers humming, and footsteps crossing linoleum now felt charged, as though the building itself was bracing. In the administrative office down the corridor, a staffer stared at her monitor with the uneasy stillness of someone who had just discovered a contradiction that should not exist. Her cubicle was a narrow partitioned space, lit by the sickly glow of an overhead bulb that buzzed at irregular intervals. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen mid-gesture. The search result on the screen pulsed in front of her. Maya Lawson, state's attorney appointed. The timestamp of the appointment had updated only hours earlier. That can't be right. She whispered to no one. Her supervisor leaned over the partition, annoyed. What now? This name. Lawson. She's marked as someone important. Very important. He frowned and stepped into the cubicle, leaning closer to the screen. The glow lit the underside of his jaw in an unflattering shade of green. His eyes scanned the record, then scanned it again. That's impossible, he muttered. She wasn't on the arrival roster. She was, the staffer said, voice thinning. But under protected status? The manifest flagged her, but someone didn't check the indicator. They both stared at the line that confirmed her status. A single administrative oversight now widening into a chasm. The supervisor straightened, throat tightening. Call the security wing. Officers 3 rooms away began whispering almost instantly, their voices low but urgent, bouncing off the sterile walls in fragmented pieces. State's attorney. In custody? This is bad. Very bad. What do we do? Like an electrical current traveling through exposed wiring. The truth moved fast. Back in the inquiry room, Maya remained seated, posture unbroken. Wrists still bound in metal loops that cut faint impressions into her skin. The overhead lamp cast its uncompromising glow onto her face, illuminating each controlled breath. The supervisor who had questioned her earlier returned, but the authority he carried before had thinned. His movements were stiff, like someone walking through a room filled with invisible tripwires. Behind him, the arresting officer hovered near the doorway, face pale, shoulders a little hunched. As if waiting for impact, the supervisor cleared his throat. The sound came out dry, brittle. Ma'am. We need. His words stalled. He swallowed. We need to confirm something. Maya didn't shift her gaze. Her eyes held him with the same calm they had held him before, but now the calm felt different to him, less like stubborn silence. More like a truth he had failed to detect. He placed a printed page on the table. The paper trembled slightly under his hand. The ink was fresh. The edges were still warm from the machine. A record. Her record. He didn't push it toward her. He simply left it there, like an offering. He took a breath. Is your name? Maya Lawson. The question filled the room with a sharp, sudden stillness. A fissure in the air, the lamp buzzed louder. As though drawing nearer, Maya's answer arrived after a pause, measured not in seconds, but in dignity. Yes. The word was soft, controlled, precise, a quiet truth delivered into a space that hadn't deserved it. The officer behind the supervisor lowered his gaze to the floor. Shame spread through his posture like a slow, heavy tide. The supervisor's jaw tightened. His authority cracked down the middle. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you didn't ask," Maya said. Her voice carried no anger, only clarity. The type that stripped excuses down to their roots. The supervisor opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing the truth of it. He hadn't asked. He'd assumed. And assumptions in this room had the force of law outside in the hallway. More officers had gathered, their whispers a soft, frantic chorus. "She's the new one." They just swore her in. God, she was handcuffed. What do we do now? The supervisor turned toward the door, suddenly aware of the audience gathering beyond it. He shut it firmly, muting their voices but not the panic. When he faced her again, his expression carried a mixture of dread and disbelief. We need to remove those cuffs." He reached for the key at his belt, but his hand shook. He stopped halfway, hesitated, then slowly lowered it. He wasn't sure he was the one allowed to touch her anymore. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. Minutes ago, he had been ready to detain her without question. Now the metal between them felt like an indictment of his own making. Footsteps approached the door rapid. Urgent, a new figure entered, the airport administrator. Eyes wide with the kind of professional terror reserved for mistakes that could cost careers or entire departments. "Supervisor," he said, voice tense. "We just spoke with the governor's office. They confirmed her status." The supervisor closed his eyes briefly. A slow exhale escaped him. The administrator continued, lowering his tone. "They're asking what happened." "What exactly happened?" The supervisor's gaze drifted to the cuffs around Maya's wrists. The cold metal gleamed under the overhead lamp like a cruel punctuation mark. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We need to fix this." Maya lifted her chin by a fraction, the movement measured and deliberate. "You can't fix what you refuse to see." The room absorbed the words like a blow. The administrator swallowed, throat bobbing. He glanced toward the printed record on the table, then toward the cuffs, then toward the door, where whispers pressed against the silence. I'll get the regional chief," he said. Retreating quickly, his footsteps faded. The room felt heavier. The supervisor stepped closer to Maya. I'm going to remove these now." She watched him. Not with forgiveness, not with anger, just with truth. He reached for the key again, his hands unsteady. The lock clicked softly. The first cuff loosened. Humiliation flickered across his face. Before he finished, he paused, looking at her as if realizing the enormity of the moment. She remained still. The second cuff opened with a final, undeniable snap. Metal separated from skin. The cuffs dangled in the supervisor's hand. Two small circles of steel that had just reshaped an entire institution's self-perception. Behind him, the computer screen in the corridor continued to glow, casting a rectangle of light across the floor. Her name pulsed on it like a quiet verdict. Maya Lawson, state's attorney. In custody, no longer silent, and the whispers outside the door continued rising. Like a wave gathering force before the inevitable crash, the system had realized its mistake. Now, it had to face it. The corridor felt colder when they brought him back. The arresting officer stepped through the doorway with the stiff, jerking movements of someone who had lost command of his own limbs. The overhead lamp in the inquiry room cast a harsh line across his face, revealing the pallor beneath his skin. His eyes avoided Maya at first. Then they flicked toward, her wrists no longer encircled by metal, and flinched. The supervisor stood beside him, shoulders squared but voice subdued. "Protocol requires," he said quietly, "that the officer who made the arrest be the one to remove the restraints." She also understood the meaning buried beneath that sentence. He must face what he did. With his own hands, the cuffs lay on the metal table between them. Their steel glinted sharply under the lamp, small but unalterable. Symbols of assumption shaped into objects. Symbols of a system that defaulted to containment when confronted with quiet, composed blackness. The officer swallowed. The sound was audible. Maya. He stopped himself. Corrected painfully. Ms. Lawson. She remained standing upright, aligned, dignity held like a pillar through her spine. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, fingers relaxed, as if she were suspended in that thin margin between patience and revelation. He stepped closer. Each movement felt weighted, as if he fought gravity itself. His right hand drifted toward the cuffs. It shook visibly. Maya did not move. "Go on," the supervisor murmured. The officer picked up the restraints. They rattled softly, an accidental confession of nerves. He held them awkwardly, as if they were suddenly foreign to him, no longer tools but evidence. His eyes finally met hers. For a brief moment, she saw something break open behind them. Confusion, shame, disbelief, fall braided into a single, raw expression. "Hold out your hands," he said. It was a request this time, not a command. Maya lifted her arms slowly. Not in surrender, but in truth. Her wrists turned upward, revealing the faint lines the metal had left behind. Not wounds. Marks, temporary, but telling. He leaned forward. The cuffs hovered near her. His breathing hitched. He inserted the key into the first lock. A pause. A click. Soft, but cutting. The sound carried more weight than the steel itself. He opened the cuff. The metal parted from her wrist like something releasing a held breath. He hesitated before reaching for the second. The key scraped against the lock, fumbling, slipping once, twice. His hands trembled harder. Maya remained still. Finally, the second cuff opened with a matching click, a small mechanical exhale that seemed to echo off the walls. The officer stepped back, as though distance could soften the truth of what he had done. He held the open cuffs in both hands now, unsure where to place them, unsure what to do with this sudden burden. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Ms. Lawson, your belongings." He gestured toward the door. A staffer entered. Placing Maya's leather case onto the table with both hands as if offering something sacred. The case looked unchanged, but context made it heavier. It was the only object in the room that had known the truth from the beginning. Maya reached for it. The leather warmed beneath her touch, carrying both memory and promise. She lifted it off the table, letting her fingers rest for an extra second on the worn strap. The room watched, material, modest, unmistakably hers, and a witness to everything that had unfolded. When she turned back to the two officers, the space felt tighter, as though the walls themselves braced for the words that were coming. She spoke evenly, her voice low but resonant. "My name," she said, "is Maya Lawson." The officer who had cuffed her swallowed. She let the silence hold for a moment, just long enough to force every person in the room to confront it. Then she continued. With clarity shaped like tempered steel, "I am the state's attorney." The title did not rise in volume. It did not boast. It did not threaten. It revealed, and in revealing, it judged. The officer's face collapsed inward guilt, swallowing the rigid lines of earlier authority. His hands dropped to his sides, still clutching the open cuffs like a question he could no longer answer. The supervisor stiffened, jaw clenching as the full scope of the failure settled on him. His clipboard now looked faintly absurd in his grip forms, meant to categorize her, invalidate her, diminish her. The pen tucked behind his ear trembled. No one spoke. Maya let the silence deepen, becoming its own form of accountability. In that quiet, the room understood the truth she had carried in without telling them. She needed no badge to command authority. Her unwavering stillness had been enough. Her refusal to bend had been enough. Only when she sensed the weight of the moment, sunk fully, did she speak again. "I did not withhold my identity," she said. "You never looked for it." The officer flinched. "You never asked," she added, this time turning her gaze directly on the man who had placed cuffs on her. "You assumed." The room swallowed her words like a verdict. Behind them, the hallway murmured with the faint hum of administrative panic-urgent voices. Hurried footsteps, whispered what-ifs. The system was scrambling to rearrange its self-image. But here, inside this small, overlit room, the collapse was personal. The officer took a step backward. "Ma'am, She raised one hand. He stopped instantly. "No," she said, calm and final. "Not now." He lowered his eyes. The cuffs dangled loosely from his fingers. Symbol now, rather than restraint. Maya lifted her leather case, holding it not like a shield, but like an anchor solid, grounding. The reminder of who she had been even when the system tried to redefine her. She moved toward the door, but before leaving, she turned back, her posture always central to her, power held steady, spine tall beneath the unforgiving lamp. Her shadow stretched behind her, long and defined, cast sharply across the inquiry room floor, the symbol of someone who had stayed herself when everything tried to shrink her. "Next time," she said quietly, "see people before you judge them." The officer's breath broke audibly. The supervisor bowed his head. No one followed her as she stepped into the hallway. No one dared to. The leather case swung at her side. The cuffs lay open in the officer's shaking hands, and the system, confronted by its own reflection, stood silent. The terminal had not changed, but it felt different as she stepped back into it. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their pallid glow across polished floors. The same late-night announcements chimed through the speakers in soft, sterile tones: flight delays, gate changes, reminders about unattended bags. Nothing remarkable. Nothing emotional. Just the machinery of transit continuing, as if the last hour had been an insignificant ripple in an otherwise calm pool. Yet the moment Maya re-entered the concourse, the air shifted. She walked at the front of a small procession: administrators, security supervisors. The officer who had unlocked her cuffs trailing several steps behind, as if distance could rewrite sequence. Their footsteps beat out an uneven rhythm, echoing along the hollow corridor. The sound followed Maya with the cadence of an accidental procession. One she neither requested nor acknowledged. She kept her pace, steady, measured, unhurried. Each step returned her to the place she had been taken from, an invisible retracing of her own erasure. Now reversed, her leather case hung at her side, the worn strap brushing lightly against her palm with each movement. Its presence was grounding, a quiet reminder that she had entered this terminal whole. The system had tried to make her small. She had remained intact. As they walked, passengers lifted their eyes. Some glanced quickly away, instinctively avoiding the tension rippling around her. Others watched openly, heads following the group with a mixture of curiosity and unease. No one spoke. The silence had its own gravity, dense, ceremonial, binding everyone to the unfolding tableau, the administrators flanking her attempted professional composure. But their expressions betrayed an unsettling mix of shame and calculation. They were already imagining the chain reactions: phone calls, reports, statements, drafted in cautiously neutral language. Maya could hear the bureaucratic machinery spinning behind their silence. She did not help them by speaking. Her quiet pressed against them harder than any accusation. They approached the central atrium, where tall glass walls framed the night outside. The reflections in the glass caught them, elongated silhouettes walking in a brittle formation. Maya slowed, her own image coming into sharper focus as she neared the windows. The reflection showed exactly what had happened. One woman walking forward, several others following. A reversal of authority, more honest than any apology they could offer. For a moment, she studied the mirrored version of herself. The overhead lights fractured across the glass, creating faint halos of glare around her figure. It was almost symbolic, the system's artificial brightness failing to obscure her presence. Behind her, the officer shifted, his footsteps faltering. The cuffs he had removed now sat clipped to his belt again, but they weighed differently tonight. He looked everywhere but at her reflection. The loudspeaker chimed, a pure, sterile tone that sliced the quiet. Maya paused mid-step, for just a breath. She let the sound fill the air around her, an institutional bell marking the hour, the movement, the moment. She imagined this chime had echoed thousands of times across thousands of identical terminals, each time indifferent to the small injustices occurring beneath it. When the announcement ended, she resumed walking, her feet tapped softly against the gleaming floor. Click, click, Click. The echo repeated itself with perfect symmetry. It sounded like composure. It sounded like judgment. It sounded like someone refusing to shrink. The administrators hurried slightly to keep pace. One of them, a man with a badge clipped too neatly to his breast, pocket leaned toward her. Double quotes Ms. Lawson. If you'd like to use a private exit, she didn't break stride. No. Her refusal hung between them. Absolutism in a single syllable. They passed a row of empty seats where travelers had sprawled earlier, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the restricted doors. Now the seating area looked like a gallery of still life, the discarded coffee cup, the abandoned magazines splayed open, the metal armrests cold and rigid. Even these objects seemed to watch her pass. Ahead, the family stood beside gate 42, their luggage arranged in tidy rows. A little girl clutched a stuffed bear, gaze fixed on the passing officials. She tugged her mother's sleeve. "Who's she?" the child whispered. The mother shook her head, quietly urging her eyes away. Not in fear, in recognition that some moments were too charged to explain to a child in real time. Maya didn't look at them. But she felt the question follow her, small and sincere. Cutting through the emptiness, the procession reached a long connector. Hallway and artery of the terminal lined with glossy tiles that stretched outward in a reflective ripple. Maya walked down the center of it, the group fanning behind her in a loose formation that looked eerily. Like a reversed escort, every step marked a transfer of power, not granted by them, reclaimed by her. Halfway down the corridor, the officer behind her finally spoke. His voice cracked on the first word. "Ma'am." The supervisor shot him a warning look, but the damage had already been done. Maya stopped walking. The group halted behind her, the echoes fading into a tense electric silence. She didn't turn. Not right away. Instead, she studied her reflection in the glossy wall to her left, her posture tall, shoulders steady, the leather case resting against her leg like a companion bearing witness. Only then did she pivot, her movements slow, deliberate, anchored in a dignity that made the others straighten involuntarily. The officer couldn't meet her eyes. "Didn't know," he murmured. She let the silence answer for her. It answered better than words. After several seconds, she spoke quiet, precise. "You didn't ask." His breath stuttered. The corridor seemed to constrict around him. Maya turned away, ending the exchange. Her steps resumed. The echoes returned. The procession followed as they neared the escalators leading to the main exit. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered the briefest tremor in the system's facade. The moment passed quickly, but not before casting a fractured shadow across Maya's path, splitting her reflection into two parallel silhouettes, gliding forward in perfect synchronization. A symbol, she realized. The person she was before they laid hands on her, and the person who emerged afterward, not changed, but confirmed. When the escalator carried her downward, the administrators remained slightly above her, their elevated position meaningless in the shifting geometry of power. Maya reached the base and stepped off, her leather case swinging lightly at her side. She continued forward without pause, her pace steady, her silence immense. Behind her, the terminal resumed its usual rhythm. The chimes sounded. The travelers moved. The system carried on. But within that vast, indifferent space, the walk had carved something irreversible into its sterile floors. A record, a reckoning, a reminder, the kind that doesn't fade. The sliding doors parted with a muted hiss, releasing Maya into the cold night air just beyond the terminal. The temperature drop was sharp enough to sting, but she welcomed it, the first honest sensation in hours. The fluorescent hum of the airport receded behind her, placed by the frenzied thrum of reporters already assembled along the walkway. News. Quickly when it served spectacle. Even faster when the spectacle involved power. Camera lights snapped on in jagged bursts, strobing the pavement with white fissures of brightness. A forest of microphones angled toward her, bristling like metal reeds straining for the wind of her words. Reporters pressed against the design of their own barricades, each voice reaching for primacy, each question sharpened to pierce. "Ms. Lawson, did TSA racially profile you?" Were you assaulted, ma'am? Do you intend to press charges? Were the officers aware of your appointment? Questions came layered, overlapping, indistinguishable. Noise arranged itself into a wall. Beyond it, the airport's glass facade reflected the scene back as a distorted tableau of reporters, lights, outstretched microphones, and at the center, a single steady figure holding a leather case. Maya paused, just steps from the doors. Not to pose, not to gather attention, but to claim the stillness that belonged to her. Immediately, the crowd surged, sound peaking like a mechanical tide. She raised one hand. A simple, unadorned gesture. The noise broke. Reporters fell silent with surprising precision, their hunger temporarily restrained. The weight of her composure pulled the chaos into order. Maya looked out over the microphones. Her gaze didn't seek the friendliest face or the most prominent outlet. It swept evenly across the crowd, deliberate, steady, equalizing. Camera lights glinted off her eyes. The reflections made them appear as twin points of calm against a field of urgency. When she spoke, her voice carried not volume, but gravitas. "I will make a statement," she said. "Then I will take no questions." Some in the crowd shifted, displeased, but none interrupted. The authority in her tone was unmistakable and not defensive, not commanding. Certain. Maya's fingers tightened briefly around the strap of her leather case, grounding her. The case hung at her side like a testament, still bearing the quiet dignity the night had attempted to strip from her. She began, "Tonight, at this airport, I was detained without justification. Camera shutters clicked violently. Was questioned without cause." Another. "Eruption of flashes, and I was restrained without being. Treated as a person first." The words were clean, pared down to their truth. No adjectives, no embellishment. Just the stark contours of what had happened. A few reporters exchanged quick glances. This was not the outrage they had prepared to capture. Not a shout. Not a wound displayed for the lens, Maya continued. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a momentary lapse. It was the predictable outcome of a system that too often sees threat where there is none. Her voice remained unchanged, steady as a metronome. The cameras recorded every syllable, though they would later try to mold them into sharper shapes for broadcast. "I did not reveal my title," she said, "because my dignity does not depend on it." The words struck the crowd with the precision of a scalpel. Had I been a teacher, a nurse, a student, or simply a woman traveling home, what happened tonight would still be wrong. One of the cameras wavered slightly, its operator adjusting stance. Suddenly aware of the moment's gravity, Maya took a breath. It was barely visible, but it shifted something in the air. Her face remained composed, but her eyes carried a deeper weight. The knowledge that her restraint was not for their comfort, but for the truth itself. "This incident is not about me," she said. "It is about a pattern, a culture, a reflex within institutions to assume guilt where none exists." No one moved. Not even the security administrator who had followed her out, hovering several feet behind, hoping to remain invisible. "I believe in accountability," she added. "I believe in systems that admit their failures so they can be rebuilt stronger." Her gaze passed briefly across the group of airport officials waiting in the shadows, then returned to the press. "Therefore, I expect a full review. It's transparent, independent, immediate." Flushes erupted again, but the night swallowed them quickly. "I do not seek retaliation," she said. "I seek responsibility." A murmur rippled at the edge of the crowd, journalists catching the deliberate distinction Maya held there. Attention with an unwavering stillness. "Power does not excuse harm," she said. "Nor does apology erase it. What matters is whether the system chooses to correct itself." The microphones leaned closer. As if pulled by the gravity of her clarity, she finished with a sentence that landed like a verdict. "I will not be silent, and I will not be used." Then she stepped back, not in retreat, but in finality. A few reporters shouted follow-up questions. voices rising in a last attempt to break through her composure. Ms. Lawson, did the officers know who you were? Do you believe this was racial bias? Will you resign in protest? Will you pursue legal action? The microphone stabbed forward again. The lights sharpened. The hunger returned. Maya didn't answer. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She simply turned away. Letting silence be the period at the end of her statement, her footsteps carried her past the semicircle of press, past the barricades, into the dimmer stretch of the walkway where the night reclaimed its natural quiet. Her leather case brushed her side with each movement, the rhythm of something steady and consistent, something that belonged to her alone. Behind her, camera flashes continued, burning brief holes in the darkness. The reporters kept shouting for a few more seconds, but the force of her refusal drained the urgency from their voices. Soon, the noise settled into a low, distant murmur. Maya walked forward, not quickly, not triumphantly, simply and firmly. As someone who had spoken truth and owed nothing more, the system had tried to define her tonight. She had answered not with fury, but with clarity, not with spectacle, but with principle, not with performance, but with presence. And as she moved beyond the reach of the cameras, the lights dimmed behind her, leaving only the quiet shape of accountability she had carved into the night, an imprint the press would chase. The officers would fear, and the state itself would have to confront. Her silence now was not retreat. It was sovereignty. Maya's new office was still half unfamiliar, its surfaces too clean, its air too still, its furniture waiting for the imprint of her presence. The space smelled faintly of fresh paint, an unstirred carpet Faberza. Room recently prepared, but not yet lived in. A wide window stretched across the far wall, offering a high-angled view of the city. At night, the skyline flickered with light, steady office grids, and blinking aircraft beacons, the slow pulse of traffic below. The city breathed like a vast organism, each illumination a heartbeat, each shadow a bruise. On her desk lay the objects of her authority, arranged neatly, though she had not touched them yet. Her ID badge, her nameplate still wrapped in thin plastic, and a stack of reports freshly delivered from multiple agencies. None of them were thick. Institutions preferred to delay their density, to substitute substance with preliminary phrasing until forced otherwise. Maya set her leather case beside the desk. It landed with a soft, grounded thud. A private punctuation. She removed her coat, draped it over the chair, and sat. The silence of the room did not soothe her. It made space for memory-cold fluorescent floors, a metal table, the bite of handcuffs, but she did not flinch. These recollections were not wounds to hide. They were evidence. She pulled the first report toward her, its binder clipped, catching briefly on the desk. Initial incident summary, airport detainment, neutral headings, sanitized language, familiar tactics. The supervisors had written what they always wrote. Unclear circumstances, possible miscommunication, standard procedure. She read each phrase as if dissecting a specimen. No mention of assumption. No mention of bias. No mention of the moment quiet composure became known compliance. Knock sounded at her door, light, almost cautious. "Come in." Her deputy entered, a measured woman, mid-50s, with rectangular glasses and a manner that suggested she understood both power and its fragile performances. She held a slim folder in her hands. "This came from Internal Affairs," she said, placing it gently on the desk. "They're bracing for an inquiry. They want guidance on scope." Maya glanced at the folder before meeting her deputy's eyes. "And what do you think the scope should be?" A pause. A shift. The deputy weighed honesty against political instinct. Honesty won. "Wider than they're comfortable with," she said. Maya nodded once. "Then that's where we begin." The deputy hesitated. "There's also been considerable public reaction. Media panels, editorials, statements from civil rights groups. The governor's office expects you'll want to give a follow-up address." "I will." "When?" "When the system has something substantive to say," Maya replied. "Not before." Deputy's spine straightened, as if relieved by the clarity. "Understood." When the door closed again, Maya returned to the documents. This time she opened the Internal Affairs folder. These pages were different, less polished, more uncomfortable. Notes about training gaps. Complaints of profiling logged but unresolved. A footnote referencing repeated concerns about officer conduct during late-night shifts. Truth had texture. It scraped when touched. She made annotations in the margins, precise, unemotional, incisive. Questions for the inquiry. Demands for full timeline reconstruction. Requests for officer body cam footage, including from adjoining units at the top of a fresh page. She wrote one line, "Identify systemic catalysts, not individual excuses." The word steadied her. Her gaze drifted momentarily to her ID. Badge on the desk, its glossy surface reflecting the sharp overhead lighting. The photo stared back at her, composed and direct. Taken hours before the airport had tried to shrink her into something forgettable. The irony was not lost on her. This badge, symbol of her authority, had been in her bag while the system pretended not to see her. She picked it up, feeling its slight weight, then set it down again deliberately, placing it closer to the center of the desk. There was another knock. Firmer this time, the chief of staff stepped in. Younger, brisk, wearing urgency like cologne. "We've received preliminary disciplinary recommendations from the Airport Police Commission." He handed her a printed sheet. Maya scanned it quickly. Administrative leave. Retraining, temporary reassignment, cosmetic measures. Shielding maneuvers. "This is inadequate," she said. "I expected you'd say that." "Prepare a request for a full external review," she continued. "Not just of the officers. Of protocols, oversight, data collection, and complaint follow-up procedures. I want this to be structural." He hesitated. "This will trigger pushback." "A lot," Good Maya said. "Pushback means we're touching the right pressure points." The chief of staff nodded slowly, then exited, leaving a trail of palpable tension behind him. Maya returned to the chair. For a moment, she simply sat, hands folded, gaze on the window. Below, the city's lights shimmered in imperfect constellations. Every window, every street lamp, every blinking signal represented a choice, a consequence, a chain of cause and effect woven into the civic fabric. She thought of the terminal corridor, the mirrored reflections, the silence she chose instead of spectacle, the system recoiling, then scrambling to recompose itself. All of it had led here. To this room, to the machinery she now commanded. She opened the final file on her desk. Public Response Digest, a compilation of community reactions, statements, editorials, briefings. Some were outraged, some cautious, some already attempting to twist the narrative into something tidier. It's more convenient, but threaded through them all was one consistent truth. People had seen what happened, and they would not let the system quietly forget. Maya closed the folder. She picked up her ID badge again, this time clipping it to her blazer. It clicked into place with a small, decisive snap going faintly in the quiet office. She stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, illuminated and flawed. A system of systems, a network of power and failure and persistence. She rested one hand lightly against the glass. It was cool beneath her palm, vibrating faintly with the distant hum of traffic and life. A reflection formed beside her own, the badge, catching city light and throwing it back in a soft gleam. In that dual-image woman and Rawl, she saw the truth she had always known. But now embodied fully, the institution had tried to break her. Now she would make it answer for itself. Behind her, the office lights glowed sterile and bright machinery, waiting for activation. Below, the city pulsed with unresolved stories, and above it all, the new state's attorney stood between what the system had been and what it still might become. Steady enough to confront both without flinching, the zoom-out belonged not to her, but to the institution, vast, grinding, unfinished, its fate now bent, however slightly, by a woman who refused to be defined by its darkest reflexes. The night continued. The city breathed, and the work began.